Okay, so I think we're ready to begin. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Tammy Jacobowitz, is the chair of the Tanach department at SAR High School in Riverdale, New York. She earned a PhD in Midrash from the University of Pennsylvania as a Wexner Graduate Fellow, and also as a graduate of Drisha's Scholar Circle. Besides for teaching her teenagers at SAR, she teaches adults in many different forms. In particular, she is the founding director of Makom Basiach, which is SAR's adult education program for parents in their school community, which is a beautiful thing. And at least I read also that Dr. Jacobowitz is also working on a Parsha book aimed for parents reading to young children. So she is an educator who has experience and thinks about teaching people of all ages, from youngest to oldest. And so we're very excited to have her with us tonight. Again, the source sheet is in the chat box. And I think we're not too large of a group. So if people have questions, I'll trust you at the appropriate time. You can either just call out, raise your hand, however you want to do it, and ask any questions or make a comment. We'd love to have discussion as always. And the topic tonight is With Eyes on God, the Rabbinic Gaze and a Theology of Childbirth. Thank you, Dr. Jacobowitz.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for inviting me. With all of the news of the snow, I'm particularly grateful that I only had to come to my basement in order to arrive in Boston tonight. So that's really quite the silver lining here. I'll add just one thing. I mean, my nature is to teach in a participatory way, and I really look forward to hearing your comments and questions along the way. But one of the benefits of teaching on Zoom, I'm sure that you've already taken advantage of this, is the chat box. So if something pops into your head while I'm speaking, please put it in there, and probably somebody else in the class will see it and respond to you. This works less well with teenagers because they really care about what they're having for breakfast and where they're sitting in the room, and that can be distracting, but I trust that won't be our back channeling tonight. Okay, last intro, it is not often that I get to talk about this topic, With Eyes on God, the Rabbinic Gaze and the Theology of Childbirth. Most people, when they hear that topic, say, okay, not sure about that, but your rabbi actually said, bring that on. So it is the material that I studied for my doctorate. So you will get to hear about Vayikra and a little bit, hopefully, about the Parsha book that you mentioned. But I just want to warn you, this is like adult material. It's challenging, it's provocative, and I've never done it on Zoom. So I'm excited to see what that's like. So we're at the tail end of Breshit, and these are the Parshiot where we feel very much at home. It's familiar territory. We know the stories inside out. And furthermore, when we come to Shabbat and we either in the old days got to hear a drasha, or these days read the Parsha, read something that we've printed out, we feel, I would say, a very seamless ability to connect what we're learning to our lives. That's Breshit, right? That's that excitement we get after Simchat Torah, because we love reading about, for good reason, the very complex lives of the Avot and all of their struggles and challenges, which feel very relatable. The story changes when you get to Vayikra. And, all rabbis know that when it comes to Vayikra, and I would say in the day school, it's a similar problem. Like there's suddenly all these other topics. I shouldn't throw you under the bus. I have no idea what you do, Rabbi Hellman, but many day school teachers who, let's say, are following the Parsha when the kids are little and they come home with all these wonderful materials. When it comes to Vayikra, suddenly, let's talk about Chesed. Let's do a unit on whatever, right? Because Vayikra is intractable. Vayikra is very challenging. And some of the problems that we experience today with Vayikra, and I shouldn't say problems really, I should say challenges, barriers, things that get in the way of that seamless kind of motion that happens to us in Breshit. For starters, unlike Breshit, Vayikra has, anyone know how many stories in the entirety of the Sefer? Two, that's right. There's only 2 stories. They're both troubling, right? Nadav and Avihu, which we hear the most about, and the other story, anyone know?
Either the Makalel or the Makoshe Shetzim.
Right. Right. So they're troubling stories. They are not easy to apply to ourselves. And stories, certainly for children, is what draws us into the Torah. That's problem number one. Problem number two, which is a problem that we'll see also faced Chazal already in the early stages of rabbinic literature, are that minus the Beit HaMikdash, minus Avodat Beit HaMikdash, there was really much of Vayikra which was no longer applicable, no more applicable to, relevant in terms of practice. And so much of Vayikra, so many of the concepts of Vayikra, when it comes to Tumantara, purity and impurity, when it comes to certainly the sacrifices, when it comes to what it means to be a Levi, a Kohen, and to operate in the Mishkan, and then the Beit HaMikdash, none of that was useful in the sense of let's read it in order to know what to do. Right? That is a problem we have today, certainly. They already had this problem after the destruction of the Second Temple, circa 70 CE. So without a Beit HaMikdash and without the applicability and the relevancy and without the story, we're left with the big problem, what to do with this book. And I want to take you on a little bit of a journey to the ancient world tonight and show you an example of a particular collection of Midrash and how they approach this problem of Vayikra. Because it's fascinating, and we'll learn a lot about Chazal and the artistry of Midrash, but also because I think there's some almost advice in here for us of how we might apply some of these approaches to our own study of Vayikra. And I would say, let's not stop there. Let's think about how we can apply this approach anytime we're reading sections of Tanach which feel very far from our worldview and which feel perhaps difficult for ethical reasons, difficult for theological reasons, right? That's another shiur to really talk about all the things that make it challenging for us. And the challenge is the good stuff. If there was no challenge, we would just read it and be done with it, right? That's what it means to study Torah. But hopefully some of the approaches that we see tonight will be applicable far beyond Vayikra. Okay, I just set myself up for a really big, platform here. Let's see if we can deliver. Okay, so if we travel for a minute to the ancient world and we think about the time after 70 CE, right? We all know that rabbinic literature is divided into two basic time periods, the Tanaim and the Amoraim, right? The Tanaitic time period is the earlier one, and that's mostly associated with the Mishnah, and the Amoraic time period is the later one, which is mostly associated with the Gemara. The Midrashim were also written, collected, redacted, put together during these two time periods. And if we focus for a moment specifically on quote unquote the challenge of the Vayikra, we see two really different approaches that show up in the Midrashic literature. The first approach is the approach of the Sifra. Has anybody studied the Sifra? Probably not. You have, Michael?
Yeah.
In what context?
It's basic halacha, right?
Michael has studied a lot of things, so
Okay, so maybe that was a bad question or a good question. Yeah. So you've studied it on its own, right? The Sifra. So let's talk about the approach of the Sifra. If we're looking at ourselves and putting ourselves in the shoes of Chazal, who are living in the wake of the destruction and are actually coping with so many things beyond the interpretive problem, what to do with Vayikra. I hear a buzz. Does somebody want to? We're mostly muted. Okay. The approach of the Sifra is to say, well, if I can't actually read the psukim and then immediately apply them, what I can do, and this is what the Sifra does, I can study them, I can delve into the details of the psukim, and the study will be in place of the practice. So I was going to say, if Michael hadn't already admitted, or shared with us that he has studied the Sifra, I wasn't going to recommend it if you already find Vayikra to be challenging and maze-like in the details, because the Sifra is, all the more so. If you read the psukim on their own and you're, wondering what they mean or where they point to, the Sifra will attach the halachot that are connected to the psukim, of course, with machloket, with disagreement. And so you'll have many different positions and opinions about how to read and apply and connect any of these verses to the halachot. But that's really an approach, right? If you think about it, what to do with this body, with this whole sefer in Torah, which we don't have, again, us being Chazal, the option of saying, all right, don't worry about it, read the other ones. right? The Torah is eternal and written for us to accept, to embrace and learn from at all time periods. We don't have the quote unquote luxury of doing that. So the Sifra's approach is to say, well, in place of practice, study. That's one approach. There's a totally different approach, which is the approach advanced by the Amoreic Midrashic collection, known as Vayikra Rabbah. And that's the collection that I spent a fair number of years studying and trying to understand how it does what it does. Al regel achad, on one foot, what their basic approach in Vayikra Rabbah is. Rather than do like the Sifra and delve ever more deeply into the laws and the details of the mitzvot and have the experience of study be the replacement for practice, what Vayikra Rabbah suggests is that the verses of Vayikra can be very meaningful launching pads for big ideas, critical ideas that will help advance us theologically, ethically, as individual members of the Jewish people. And the strategy, if you will, is to find like the kernel, find the essential idea that is, I don't want to say buried, that's too morbid, but kind of, located somewhere in the maze of psukim that are full of, might I say, esoteric detail. Locate that essential idea and then amplify it and extend it to the contemporary audience. Does that make sense as an approach? Okay, it will make a lot more sense when I show you an example. But that is the essential idea. And what's fascinating about Vayikra Rabbah, right? You might say to me, I don't know, that sounds familiar. A lot of people do that, right? Skip the details, focus on one thing, make that your sermon. Again, Rabbi Hellman, I have no idea how you give a sermon, so stand up for yourself if I'm misrepresenting, right? But I don't know, on a Shabbos morning, is it really my job to teach the whole parsha? No, it's my job, right? I would imagine to find something meaningful here, find something in here that is useful for the congregation and really make that the focus. With Vayikra, that's a lot harder, but that's what they do. And what I was saying is that what is wonderful about this book is that it does not in any way suggest that Vayikra can be ignored or that the psukim themselves are not essential. Vayikra Rabbah manages to preserve, our attention and our attentiveness to the details of Vayikra while also finding a mechanism to make Vayikra come alive. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Let me show you how this works. I want to start with the psukim in Vayikra Perek Yud Bet. That's the first part that you have on your source sheet. And these psukim, I would say, within the realm of groaning that happens when it comes to the parshiot of Vayikra, should a bar or bar mitzvah girl, bar mitzvah girl or bar mitzvah boy have Tazria or Mitzora as their parshiot, I mean, there's like full-on panic, right? So Mitzora for obvious reasons, because who wants to talk about Zarat ever, and certainly not on a party day, and Tazria because it's just very, bloody and bodily and feels somewhat inappropriate, right, for a prepubescent kid. So here, if you find yourself in that scenario in the coming years, children or grandchildren, hopefully tonight you'll have some ideas of, ways to calm everyone down and say, well, there's actually a lot here that could maybe be useful for you. So let's just look at the psukim first before we see how Vayikra Rabbah offers this approach of locating the essential idea and amplifying it for a contemporary audience. We're all familiar with these psukim. We're all familiar with the kinds of questions we ask every year when we come to them, but I'd love to hear what they are from you. So let's just read together. I'm going to read quickly in Hebrew, and then I'm going to ask you what interests you in these psukim. What do you find? What have you found in the past to be questions that you have, or what questions do you have tonight? So it begins fairly innocuously. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to bnei Yisrael, saying, Isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar, v'tama shivat yamim, ki me nidat divota titma. So a woman, when I'm purposely not spending time on the bolded words, but a woman when she gives birth, and if the child turns out to be a boy, she is she finds herself tameh. She finds herself in a status of impurity for 7 days, just like the 7 days of her nida. Uvayom hashmini yimol besar orlato. On the 8th day will be the brit milah for that boy. Now that pasuk quite literally interrupts the focus, right? The focus was on the woman and what happens to her in terms of purity and impurity. Why is that pasuk there? Because it's the 8th day. So we just talked about the first 7 days. And on the 8th day, this is not something, in fact, it's not at all on the mother to do. It's on the father to do. As an aside, you know, I have one son, and I belong to a family that works hard to create opportunities for engagement, both for men and women, boys and girls. And when I was learning these psukim when my son was born, I really felt quite comfortable that at the Brit Milah, it was not my place to be involved, because the Brit is the time where the father brings the child into the community, quite very literally interrupting the bonding that's happening between the mother and the father and the child, creating a new kind of bond. And then just like the pasuk, bringing the baby right back, right? So it's like a performance of this extra, not extra, but this other bond that also needs to form, you know, in this kind of way. That was an aside. All right, back to the psukim. 8th day, Brit Milah. Pasuk Daled. Ushloshim yom ushlosha yamim teshev bidmei tahora b'chol kodesh lo tiga ve'el hamikdash lo tavo ad meloot yemei tahora. If we were in class, we would bracket this off. Bet through Daled, that's the first item, right? If it's a boy, 7 days, and then 33 days where she is not able to go to the mikdash. It's a different kind of tuma in addition to the 7. And then pasuk Hey through Vav, through pasuk Hey, the set tells you if it's a girl, what happens. Instead of 7 days, it's 14 days. Instead of 33 days, it's 66 days. And then the psukim continue to say, well, what happens at the end? How does she come out of this state of tuma? Uvimloot yemei tahora levein o levat tavi keves ben shnato leola uben yona otor lechatat. So she brings 2 different animals, 2 different korbanot. One is an olah offering and one is a chatat offering. And she brings it at the entrance of the Ohel Moed, El HaKohen. So there's a new party, a new person who emerges on the scene. The Kohen shows up and greets her. V'hi krivo lifnei Hashem, and he offers it for her, v'tahara, zo Torah tayoledet. This is the Torah, this is the law for a woman who gives birth, la zachar ula nekeva. Finally, pasuk chet, the end of this section. V'im lo timtza yada deiseh v'lakcha shtei torim o shnei v'nei yonah echad leolah v'echad lechatat v'chiper aleha hakohen v'tahera. Actually, one of my favorite psukim in the whole of the Torah, which sounds very silly and strange, but at the end of this set of requirements for a woman giving birth to a boy or a girl and tuma and coming out of it, the section ends by saying, listen, if she can't afford it, if she can't afford those other 2 korbanot, there's a cheaper option, right? And I love it because it's a section that's aware of economic justice and embedding it into the halacha of how a woman would behave in the flow, I'm aware of that pun, right, of normal events. Whoever she is, however much she has, this is what she does. Okay, those are the psukim. So what interests you? What bothers you today or in the past? What have you heard? What are the questions that, let's say, moderns ask? That's who we are.
Why would you bring a korban chatat?
Yeah.
There's no sin involved.
Good. Okay. So that's like, I would say the number one question that we ask, and it's such a good question. Like, it's jarring, right? How could it be that she's offering a korban chatat? Not only is there no sin, but she just created a new life, right? Even if we say she herself is not commanded in pru or vu, she just enabled this unbelievable thing to happen. Why should it be a korban chatat? Great.
Why should she be tamei at all?
Okay. Why should she be tamei at all? Say more.
Normally, we associate tuma maybe with death, and this is just the opposite.
Okay. So it's your question is even more fundamental to the section. Why does a woman after going through this experience, why is tuma even shayechet la, right? Why is it even, what does it have to do with her? It doesn't seem to have a lot to do with the other kinds of tuma that we know about. And I'm not sure what you're thinking about, but let's say tzarat, since we know that shows up next, that's another situation where a person comes into tuma or touches a dead body, right?
Or a dead sheretz or
Sheretz,
nevela, or, and sarat is always right, loti kamet.
right.
And
Okay, good. So if our assumption, I'm going to challenge that assumption in a moment, but if our assumption is that tuma is all about encounter with death, why is she engaged in tuma? Okay, now Linda has an answer. Postpartum women are at risk of death. Okay, Linda, that's 100% right, and certainly even more so in the ancient world, right? And even if we don't go that route and say once she is postpartum, she is at risk of death, although that's right, you could go further and say actually the experience of giving birth and being involved in childbirth is not necessarily just risky, Michael, and a potential encounter with death, but it is an encounter with the matters of life and death. I love this term, it's a liminal experience, right? It's when you're on the edges of what it means to be a normal person or to be not here anymore. Childbirth is a liminal experience. And that's a more actually expansive way of thinking about what Tuma and Tara is about. It's any experience where you are, well, not any, but as defined by halacha, where you are encountering those borders, life and death. So that's one possibility. Okay, we could talk about that more. What other questions do we have? We have korban chatat, we have why tuma, and what else?
Why is it that the period for a boy is half the period for a girl? And what exactly is the nature of this second period? And also, I'm curious because I don't know very much about it. How do we deal with that second period today when we don't have a Beit HaMikdash?
Great. Okay, so I would say your question is, I don't know how I'm coming up with these ranks, but that's probably the number 2 question, right? And there's an assumption, I think, behind your question, which may be wrong in your case, but I think is right in most cases. We sort of have this hunch that there's some kind of like misogyny in there. I don't know, like, why is it more for a girl? Is like having a girl worse? So you have, right? Am I right? Have you encountered that experience? There, even though I can't pin that down, that doesn't really make sense, but somehow there's like a hazy feeling there. Why 30, why 66 and 33? Why does a mother suffer more? Again, if that's our assumption about Tuma, why should she suffer more if she has a girl over a boy? Yeah, Ari, jump in.
Well, so I mean, related to that question, right, I guess is, there's the 7-day period, and then on the 8th day is the Brit Milah. So that suggests an answer to William's question, which is that you want the woman to be able to be pure in time for the Brit Milah. But if that's the case, then that doesn't fit in so well with what you suggested at the beginning, which is that a woman has no part in the Brit Milah.
Okay, but you're right. I mean, there's a kind of natural closure in halachic terms to the boy period, right? Because of the Brit Milah. Maybe that interrupts the period. I don't know. We're playing with ideas here. We're not really sure, but certainly the 7-day and the 33 are different. And that was William's other question. One has to do with she and her husband. The other has to do with her and Mikdash. And they're really quite different. But your question, I think, William, was why? Why? Maybe I can understand, especially the way the Torah says it. The 7 days are like the time period of Nida, right? And those of us who have given birth, we know that that's like 7 days is not enough to separate. I mean, it's not time yet at all, right? But what does that have to do with Mikdash, right? Why is she not able to come into the Mikdash after she's given birth? Great. That's a lot of questions. Does somebody want to, is there one more that's like, I don't know. Yeah. Jerry, you have another one?
Well, this is kind of a minor question. What happens if you have twins? Do you double the lengths? Or if you have a boy and a girl, do you go that kind of thing?
I've never thought about that. That's a great question. I would assume that they're happening simultaneously. right? It's not actually you don't extend it for 2 children. But that's a great question. And there
And
are,
if it's a boy and a girl twin, I would guess they go according to the girl because it's the longer period.
right. One almost counteracts the other, right? Or absorbs the other, right? It wouldn't be one. That's interesting. Okay, so we have a lot of questions, and I think you've heard various answers. I would say the doubling question, I have not in all of my research encountered an answer that was satisfying. And there are a lot of answers out there, and they all sound like approximations or apologetics, if I'm being less generous. The question about Korban Chatat, I have an answer for you about that, Jerry, which is Professor Milgram describes in his very important work on Vayikra that the Korban Chatat is mistranslated as a sin offering. That's the Asham. But a Korban Chatat is actually a purification offering. And you see this verb showing up throughout Vayikra. Lehachti means to purify. So he suggests that, in fact, the reason why she's offering a Korban Chatat is not because she herself has sinned in any way. That's not on the table. It's because she has encountered this life and death experience and she has entered into this liminality that poses a threat to the sacred center, which is the Mikdash. And so when a person offers a Korban Chatat, it's not even for themselves, it's for the Mikdash. It's like, it's such an out there idea because it doesn't really have a corollary today. Although maybe COVID gives us, some kinds of corollaries to think about this, right? Like you can't come back until you've been in quarantine. Like your presence actually threatens the integrity, the health center of our community. Not sure that holds up, but let's think about that. But the Korban Chatat is not for her, it's for the Mikdash. And if she doesn't offer it, right, it poses a threat to the sacred center. So that's interesting. And that shows up in lots of other places too. Other people who offer Korban Chatat who themselves have engaged in no chait whatsoever. Okay, but here's the interesting part, right? I mean, that was interesting. But here's the part where I wanted to go next. Chazal in Vayikra Rabbah, remember what they're doing. They're trying to find some essential idea that can be applied and extended as an invitation for their audience in the 5th century living in the land of Israel who could no longer read the psukim and apply them for practice. They're trying to find an essential idea here that could be amplified into a kind of homily or sermon. So interestingly enough, they don't pick up on any of those questions in Vayikra Rabbah that you just addressed. Some of those questions show up in the Gemara, right? And the Korban Chatat is actually answered in the Gemara very differently than the way I just answered it. And the questions about the doubling as well. Here's what Chazal find to be really fascinating about these psukim, and useful, I should say, useful as a springboard or a platform for developing a homily that can reach people. They focus on the opening pasuk. We didn't talk about the opening pasuk, but I bolded it. So I kind of led you there, but then I tricked you by saying I wasn't focusing on it. So don't feel bad. Isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar. Isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar. Before we look at Chazal, what is interesting about that phrase? What could be promising? What could possibly be promising in that perfunctory opening, just letting us know that the halakha that follows will be about a woman in this scenario? What do you notice? Ellen, you unmuted. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, where did this verb tazria come from?
Okay, because what's strange about it?
It's a hifil. It has the word zera in it. And I mean, it's, as far as I know, it's not used for giving birth anywhere else.
Okay, good. So first of all, the hifil is very strange. It's very active. And zera, which is normally associated with sperm, what's it doing, or child, what's it doing here? Isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar. I mean, kodem kol, first of all, what's missing in this pasuk? Who's missing?
The husband.
The husband is totally missing, okay? And the husband, frankly, now that we think about it, is not in any of these psukim, except for the fact that he's implied in that the 7 days of separation. So that's one thing to notice. And there's someone else who's missing. There's someone else who's missing in this pasuk.
Child.
Well, no, because the child is the zachar.
God.
God. Yeah. Who said that, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. God is missing. Now, why do you say that?
Well, because we always look at all the times when we have somebody conceiving, it's always God grants, at least in Chumash Bereshit, right? God is always in charge of childbearing.
Okay, so when you said we, good, I'm glad you clarified, right? I mean, hopefully today we feel a sense of connection to God when we, bring a child into the world. But certainly in the Torah, it's almost every time a woman conceives, is pregnant, gives birth, God is all over the story, right? To open up the womb, right? Vayiskor. It's never seen as a kind of automatic, hardly ever seen, right? There are exceptions. As an automatic kind of activity, God is part and parcel. And of course, you're probably, Michael, also thinking about, right, where the Gemara says there are three partners, right, in the creation of a child, of a man, a woman, and God. So for Chazal, again, this isn't a problem in the pasuk, but it's an opening. Where's God in this pasuk? So let's bring God in. And if we bring God into this pasuk, which arguably, Ellen, is about a woman in this overly active verb, right, which is very strange, seems to be doing everything on her own. Let's see what happens if we bring all those other psukim to bear, oh gosh, another pun, to this pasuk and see what comes out. What are we able to understand about ourselves? What's useful here if we bring God to this pasuk in this setting in Vayikra? Okay, so take a look at the first source that I have. I was extremely ambitious and put 3 sources here. We're only going to do 1, but you can see the others. You cannot see the others later. They follow the same principle. So Vayikra Rabbah is a collection of midrash that was put together in the 5th century, the land of Israel. Easy to remember. My advisor in graduate school told me, very early on, the Babylonians were legalists. And so obviously we follow the Babylonian Talmud in terms of halacha, but the Jews who were living in the land of Israel, known as the Palestinians, the ancient Palestinians, they had a sense of humor and they were much more creative. All of the books of midrash were written in Eretz Yisrael. This one is no exception. So 5th century. And one of the interesting features of Vayikra Rabbah, other than what I've already shared with you, is that there's a particular literary form that shows up at the beginning of every section, every parsha of Vayikra Rabbah. And a parsha in the Midrasha collection does not necessarily follow the parsha in Vayikra, nor does it follow a perek in Vayikra. What it does is, again, remember, essential idea, find it, use it, amplify it. And what Vayikra Rabbah does is collects many different homilies all around that central idea till it's exhausted, and then moves on to the next one. And the next one could be several chapters later. So when you're looking up, if you were to try to use Vayikra Rabbah to, create a sermon or give a shir, you might not find something in the area that you're focused on. So here's an example of this literary form right here. It's Parsha Yud Daled in Vayikra. So notice, right, the psukim were Parsha, that was Perek Yud Bet, so it doesn't correlate. And it's the 3rd one. And it begins with a pasuk from Eov. Chaim v'chesed asita imadi upkudatcha shamra ruchi. Should I read in the English in the interest of ease? What's your minhag? I can translate everything, or we can.
I think you can read the Hebrew, just translate as you go along.
Okay, fine. So I told you we're reading something in Vayikra. It's on Parsha Tazria. Why does it begin with a pasuk from Eov? Anybody know? Has anybody seen this form before, starting with a pasuk from a different sefer? Oh,
It's the
good.
standard form of a homily, and they're always from Eov, Tehillim, or Mishlei.
Okay, it's not just a standard form of a homily. It's a standard form of a particular kind of homily, which is called a petichta, right? Or in Hebrew, a pticha, or in English, a proem, which is not a word that anybody uses anywhere else. But it is a kind of either a mini sermon that was actually given. That's certainly what people used to think. Here they survived, or literary examples of sermons. Now, why would that be? Why would a sermon begin if the subject is Vayikra? Why would it begin, Michael, with Eov or Mishlei or Tehillim?
Because the style is to introduce another verse that's then illuminated by the primary text.
Okay, That's true. So first of all, there's that. There's a kind of mashup of psukim, which is essentially one way of defining what midrash is, a mashup of psukim. When you take a pasuk from here and a pasuk from there and you bring them together, I loved your term, illumination, right? What comes from there? And similar, again, Rabbi Hellman, sorry, but I don't know what you do when you start your sermons, but certainly, I mean, Rabbi Helfgott, Natty Helfgott is my rabbi, and he often starts with something that he heard on NPR, or something, if he's being really adventurous, something that happened in sports, or a joke, or right, and that's a signal to the audience, right? First of all, I'm with you. I'm reading what you're reading. I'm hearing what you're hearing. It wakes people up. It piques interest. It draws you in. And especially when you are listening to the same rabbi, week after week, you kind of can start to think, I know where he's going, right? I could see that he likes to talk about this and that in that way, right? It's the same thing with the Betichta, except the language of piquing interest is other verses. So the rabbis, what they were doing, in addition to creating that illumination, I would say they were very effectively bringing more Torah into people's life, right? And giving more opportunities to learn from these books that were not read liturgically, right? So Tehillim, yes, Tehillim had and has a liturgical function, but Eov, who reads Eov unless you're very depressed, right? It's not a book that you would find yourself encountering. And the Petichta is a wonderful mechanism for bringing one pasuk from one of these books. And by the way, Michael probably knows this, but I'll say these books are chosen because they're really general, right? The psukim are from wisdom literature, right? They're talking about lots of things. And so you can channel it and say, okay, but it's also talking about this. So here's the opening pasuk. It's from Eov. Chaim v'chesed asita imadi, you bestowed upon me life and care. Your providence watched over my spirit. Eov Perek Yud. If we had more time and all had Tanachim, we would read the Perek of Eov first, but I'll just cheat for you and tell you that this is a Perek, among others, where Eov is complaining, and he is protesting what God is doing to him, but his protest is on the basis of saying, God, you know me so well. You were the one who formed me. You were the one who took care of me all the time that I was in the womb. And you get, leading up to this pasuk, these very beautiful, evocative verses, which describe, in essence, the moments of conception and formation, with there being only one actor, God. And the womb is there in the psukim, but there's really no mother, right? And Eov, what he's describing again, is this sense of intimacy and connection that he had with God. God knew him all that time. And then he says, so you've seen me from day one, from day zero. You know me so well. How could you be doing this to me? Vayikra Rabbah takes this pasuk, I would suggest, because the rabbis are importing that idea of the closeness between God and every fetus, and using it, as you'll see, to deliver a particular message. This pasuk is also useful because it's kind of vague. Life and care and watch. What are you talking about? What is the life and care? What did God do specifically to take care of Eov? Okay, so here we go. Now the Midrash is going to interpret that pasuk from Eov, and eventually, by the end, lead us, if you see on the bottom in the bold, Isha ki tazri abi al zachar. This is the mark of a good petichta. You really don't know where they're going. It's not like when the rabbi tells that same joke and you're like, oh God, I could just get up and give the sermon myself. And it also can't be so far afield that you're looking at your watch and thinking it's going to take an hour and a half to get to the parsha. So you'll tell me at the end of this petichta, where did this fit in terms of the audience attention span and interest? Begins the Betichta. Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, he said 3 parables. Here's the first. Benoheg sheba'olam im notel adam mapira shelemaot v'yitain piha lemata ein hamaot mit pazrot. It's a wonderful phrase. Benoheg sheba'olam. That's all over the Midrash, right? It is in usual life, right? Borrowing from common experience. If a person were to take a money bag, okay, this was the adult content, a money bag, and turn it upside down, don't all the coins scatter? Kach Havlad sharui b'me'ei imo, ve'akadosh baruch hu mishamro, kedei shelo yipol ve'imot, ve'ein zachayim v'chesed. What is the Midrash saying? Left to the laws of gravity, a woman's body, right, on its own, should, every single time there is a fetus in the womb, the fetus should fall out. The only reason, again, according to the Midrash, and I'm aware of how loaded this is, okay? And this is obviously not suggesting that this is immediately applicable, right, to all experience, but just stick with me for a minute. The Midrash is saying that the baby, when the baby is dwelling in the me'ei imo, in the innards, right, in the womb of the mother, God watches that baby so that it doesn't fall out. That is what was meant by the pasuk in Iyov, Chaim v'chesed. It's like an extra level to allow the life. That was the chesed. Yeah, so far so good. That's parable number 1. We're nowhere near Isha ki Tazria. I don't know. I mean, maybe not nowhere near, but we're not there yet. Here's the second one. Also, Rab Abba Bar Kahana. He says, also, Benoheg Shebe'olam, Behimazu Mahalechet Rivutsa, Vehavlad Natun Betoch Me'eha, Kamin Skupasti. Okay, that's not even Hebrew. What is he talking about? He says, an animal walks horizontal. And when an animal is pregnant, the baby is hanging out in the innards of the mother like a covered wagon, nice and comfortable, right? Nice and protected. But Isha, she walks zikufa. She walks vertical. Vehavlad natun betoch me'eha. Same problem, right? Same problem. A different image, right? And this is one of the many reasons why I love Midrash. You could analyze this for many hours. Why the two, right? They offer something a little bit different. But Rav Abba Bar Kahana had 2 ways of expressing the same idea, which is, again, left to the laws of gravity, a woman's body, and now I'm going to say it in a kind of an extreme way, right, is not built for the task of safe carriage of a baby. But a woman's body also bears the markings of God's protection, unlike an animal. Right? We're most accustomed when we read a comparison between a person and an animal in rabbinic literature, we end up looking better, right? Usually we're like, I don't know if you're looking at the screen, but like we're in the middle and angels are over here and animals are over here, right? That's usually the way in which our boundaries and borders are demarcated. And we have an animal part, and that's like the base part, right? And then we have the spiritual part, and that's like the malachim. Usually when we're compared to animals, we look better. Here, I would say on some level, we look worse, right? Because animals buy it so comfy, it's so nice, so safe. Women's bodies, not so much. But there's the catch, of course, which is we get the level of shmirah. Animals' bodies don't need it, don't get it. Is everyone with me? Okay. I'm skipping number 3 because the hour is later than I thought it was. We have to end by 9. We have another class. Okay, well.
We can go if we go a few minutes over, we've done that before.
Okay, the third one of Abba Bar Kahana, now I'm just going to make you want to read it since I've told you that it's interesting. All right, we'll just read it. It's a little bit off track from the argument that he's making. It's not about gravity, but I believe that it's connected here because it's also about animals. It's also kind of racy and distracting. So let's read it. So here's the third one. He says, Benoheg Shebaolam, again, Behimazu dadeha bimakom rachma, right? The animals, how's it translated? Its udders are in the same place as its womb. Vehavlad yonek mimkom boshta, and the baby animal nurses from the place of boshet. What's boshet?
Shame.
Shame.
Shame. Okay, now we all know, right, that shame, and you're going to see in a moment, makom na'eh, a praiseworthy place. Those are not objective categories. Those are socially constructed categories, right? So you have to think about like shame for who, right? But go with me for a minute. So an animal, everything happens in the same place. That's makom boshet. But isha dadeha b'makom na'eh. V'havlad yonek mimakom kivoda. Right? And that's not so for a baby. When a baby nurses, the baby is nursing from a place of kavod, a place of honor, right? Not near boshet, right? And just what's interesting here, again, I think a baby could care less, and a mother who is trying to nurse their child could care less. So the boshet and the kavod is most likely, that's the rabbinic gaze, right? Most likely that was the male rabbis, so to speak, Chazal, who were saying, yeah, that's actually kind of nice. That's good. That's a nice thing, right? And that's a moment to say almost, thank you, God. Thank you, God, for creating women's bodies in this way and not in that way like animals. Okay, back to the regular program. Amar Reb Elazar, second idea. Im yisheh adam bekamin sha'a achat eno met. If a person were to hang out in boiling water for even an hour, wouldn't he die? But me'eha shela isha merutachin v'havlad natun betoch me'eha. But a baby, the fetus, is living for 9 months in the mother's womb, which is described as a boiling place, boiling temperature. Now, this is very interesting because ancient medical writers, the Hippocratic writers, described a woman's womb as an oven, right? What's interesting there is that the metaphor, I mean, we still say this today, or we used to, right? The buns in the oven, I don't know what people say anymore, but that idea of, right, we don't think of that literally. It's, it's metaphoric in the sense that we describe it, but the ancient writers actually thought this was literal. And Chazal, when they talk about it, they talk about it in this way of, it shouldn't be the right thing, right? That should kill off the fetus. It should boil the fetus. Again, why does that work out? Bakadosh Baruch Hu mishamro. Shelo ye'aseh shapir, shelo ye'aseh shiliyah, shelo ye'aseh sandal. Those are 3 legal terms for, right, a miscarriage. So again, here now it's not gravity, but here we have a connected idea, which is very, very similar. The chaim and the chesed is this extra protection that God offers to every single one, to every single fetus. Okay. Amar Rab Tachlifa Kesaria. This is the, I think, the comic relief in the middle of this very heavy midrash. Im ochel adam prusa achar prusa lo shniya dochet harishona, v'haisha hazu kama ma'achal hi ochelet, v'kama mashke hi shota ve'ino dochet hablad. Right, says the midrash, if a person eats like food parcel after food parcel, doesn't the second one push out the first, right? Like, okay. But a woman, she eats so much when she's pregnant and the baby still stays in, right? You're supposed to laugh. It's kind of funny, right? Again, imagining, men watching, how is this happening? Like when I eat, I can't, it doesn't work. Right? I can't keep containing the food, but this is happening. Did Chazal actually think that the reproductive tract and the digestive tract were the same? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's what this is suggesting. But again, it's like the marvel, the wonder, right, of what's happening over there in her body and how Hashem is involved in making sure that the baby makes it on the other end. Okay, last one. I'm skipping Rabbi Simon. I'm going to Rabbi Meir. Kol tish'a chodashim she'ein ha'isha ro'a dam, badin hu she'tehei ro'a. Rabbi Meir says all 9 months that she doesn't see any menstrual blood, like by law of how the body works, she should. What's happening? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ma'akadosh Baruch Hu oseh, misalko lemala midadeha ve'oseh oto ito chalav, kedei shigetzeh havlad, v'hiyelo mazon le'achol. Now, before you go crazy, you should know that this is also what Aristotle suggests, right? That the blood, which, right, where did it go? Where what's happening to it? Again, what do Chazal do? They theologize it. The blood turns into milk, and that is Hashem planning. That is Hashem making sure that this child will not only not fall out, during pregnancy, but B, at the end, will be able to survive. That's also an expression of Chaim v'Chesed. And now we're at the end of the Midrash. How does it end? Uveyoter im haya zachar. Isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar. Okay, lots to say about that uvioter, all the more so if it's a zachar. For tonight, I will just say that every single petichta in this section ends in the same way. It's a way of connecting back to the pasuk. It's not implicitly suggesting that it's better if it's a boy, but the praise, the sense of praise, which is accumulating throughout this petichta, chaim v'chesed, more chaim v'chesed, more chaim v'chesed, a sense of awe at what God does for the baby. Yes, you could say that probably in the ancient world, there was more sense of praise when a boy was born, and or it's a way of connecting. Isha ki tazria v'yalda zachar. Now, what just happened? How do I understand this pasuk differently? What did they do by connecting the pasuk in Eov? What do all these moments have to do with it? So this is what I would like to suggest. What Chazal do in this petichta, by focusing in on those words, Isha ki tazria, through the use of the pasuk in Eov, is they basically take this pasuk, which at face value seems to be about, again, just a woman, applicable only to a woman after postpartum, and introducing a set of laws which are not applicable post-Chorban. What they do by mashing it up with this pasuk in Eov is they, number one, slow down the pasuk so that it's not just about Isha showing up to childbirth and having a baby. It's about noticing all the spaces, so to speak, in between all those words where God has been involved every step of the way. It's like, opening up the pasuk to make space for God, as Michael said, that we know is there. We know every time we read other psukim in the Torah, we see that Hashem is there. What the Midrash is doing is bringing that more explicitly into this setting. Number two, how does that help us, right? Well, it helps us as people living in a post-Chorban world, because I don't know about you, but I didn't see anything in that Midrash that had anything to do with Tumantara. I didn't see anything there about the 7 or the 33 or the Korbanot or anything. What they managed to do in this petichta is take, again, these set of psukim, which are only useful for women in a particular moment of their life, and say, no, these psukim are actually relevant for all of us, because all of us were that fetus. All of us were that fetus who experienced that level of connection and intimacy with God, described by Eov in the setting that he described it as protest. Taken out of that setting now becomes the opportunity for almost each of us to be invited back in and to say, every year when you come to Isha ki tazria, that's like your cue to recover that narrative of love and care and protection that you got, that God invested in you, but you can't remember it. Not just you, none of us. We can't remember what it was like to be a fetus. But the Midrash here, again, through this pasuk, is upplaying those moments to suggest, number one, childbirth is a moment where God is involved, theologizing childbirth. Number two, focusing, meditating, reading, thinking about these psukim offers us, the average person, each of us, wherever we are in our life stages, an opportunity to reconnect, reimagine, right? And think about this level of intimacy and care that we were privileged to receive, and to extend it, and to think about, I would say, this is me talking now, other moments in our life where we could open ourselves up to receive that level of intimacy and care. So you see what I'm talking about? I mean, there's a lot here. We didn't talk about what happens to the woman's body and the difficulty of some of these metaphors, right? And also the implied suggestion of what happens if you do miscarry. What does that mean? God wasn't taking care of you, right? That's one of the ethically challenging parts of teaching this Midrash. Another reason why being on Zoom is hard. And I don't know any of you, and I don't know your life stories. And we read these Midrashim, and they can be triggers. They can be. But what I wanted to suggest tonight is a kind of method or approach or an assumption that when you come to psukim, which don't have, again, that seamless level of connection between ourselves and the text for all kinds of reasons, there are ways that we can build bridges. And we see a very ancient model coming from our tradition in the 5th century that says there is tochen here, right? There is real material and real essential value in our psukim that we just have to look for, right? And we have to figure out the steps to recover it. If you're interested more in this topic, there are many other midrashim, actually 2 others that I put on this this source sheet. If you want to talk about them further, be happy to give out my email, and maybe we'll have another opportunity in real life to go deeper into Vayikra Rabbah. Thank you guys so much. I'm sorry for going a little late. If anybody wants to share a thought or a question before
Do you
we
have to? Do you have to go, Dr. Jacobowitz?
Oh, I don't
Do you have to leave? Yeah, so I mean, if anyone wants to or needs to sign up, please feel free. But if, you know, if anyone has a question, a comment, reaction.
Thank you very much, Yasher Kochech.
Thank you, William. Thank you for coming.
Oh, I have something. Where am I?
Sit down.
I should sit down. Hang on. There's a book. A guy named Gerald Schroeder wrote a book. I forget what the name of it is now. Where he talks about the biology of basically he doesn't really mention God, but he talks about all these miraculous things that take place. There's a whole chapter on childbirth and all the amazing things that have to take place in order for a baby to be born. And I think that, you know, without you know, the rabbis, without knowing necessarily all the details of the science, I think we're really hinting at exactly that. And just you know that if it wasn't for this, the baby would miscarriage. If it wasn't for this, you know, so without knowing all the details, that's, in other words, that God created this whole system, made it so that that all of this was possible.
Right. No, you're totally right. Right. And I'm always, every time I come back to these Midrashim, I'm so amazed because, you know, they were working with the medical science that they had. You know, the Aristotelian ideas were, you know, were cutting edge, so to speak. But they knew so little. They really had so little access to what was going on. We know a lot more now, and our knowledge sometimes, you know, depending on your orientation, can lead you towards a greater sense of amazement. It can also, and I would say, like, I always felt when I was pregnant, having an ultrasound felt like a weird invasion, you know, this is not like there's too much access here. And this is shrouded in mystery. But like you said, I mean, what they're really saying is don't take that for granted, right? Don't get sort of used to the idea that this is just something that happens in the natural way of the world. I think by using these metaphors, which make it seem supernatural, right, almost impossible, they're bringing us back to that sense of wonder, and also giving us so many opportunities to meditate on the miracles that we see all the time around us, that we can grow, you know, used to, and therefore don't see their power. Yeah.
If you would examine, I remember hearing this very clearly back in nursing school, if you would very carefully look at the pathophysiology that's involved in conception, in gestation, in childbirth, you'd think, you know, the world, there's not going to be any people in this world. How's this ever going to happen?
Right. So in that case, like, greater knowledge also increases your sense of.
Yeah, it's like, how's this going to happen? You know, there's just too many pieces that have to be actually perfectly aligned.
Right. That's amazing.
And in a lot of the world, in the Western world, we've very much taken for granted that these things are going to happen. And in the third world, that's not the case. In the third world, people don't congratulate women on becoming pregnant. People don't have reveal parties or baby showers, because they look at it as a woman going through a very dangerous and precarious time. Right. And they don't assume that there's going to be a successful conclusion. We're kind of spoiled.
Right. And you made me think, Devora, when you learn the stories, you know, early, particularly in Breshit, but then also throughout the Tanach, of women who are barren and are akarot, it seems pretty clear that one of the things that's going on there, that the experience of not being able to and then being drawn into it, is a way of cementing the relationship between those women and God, which is a form of brit, right?
And it's also reminding us constantly what an absolute miracle it is to see a healthy baby with beautiful skin, who's well hydrated and rooting to its mother and doing all these wonderful things that they're supposed to, that you realize how unique and how special it is.
Exactly. Thank you.
What do you make of the end, Bioteri Mayazachar?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. I mentioned that I think the inclination would be to read it as, if this midrash is a form of praise, right? It almost turns into a tefillah, right? Like section after section of shevach. Then I think it might be very true that in the ancient world, there would be a greater sense of shevach when a boy was born, right? A girl would mean more of a sense of economic responsibility, and a male would mean, that this would bring relief to the family on some level. Just to reinforce that, Harvey, I mean, one of the suggestions right here is, the last one is about the 9 months of blood and then milk. So some people have said, maybe it means uvioter, meaning boys drink more. So there would be more milk right. But it doesn't hold up because all of the petichtaot, all of them end in the same way. And this is the only one that's talking about milk, about a mother's milk. So I think the more little we read, that it's a very easy connection between the ideas and the pasuk, Isha ki tazri vel zachar, and probably kind of unconsciously reflects the bias, which I think has an economic basis.
The other thing I want to add, the whole idea of the animals nursing from an area of shame. I think it's referring to the fact that it's very close to where the animal excretes.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it's a disgusting place most of the time.
Right. No, 100%. I think you're right. It's not just about the place of giving birth. It's also, right, excretion. But I guess what I was trying to say there is that, again, boshet, shame. I mean, we know this from the way that people dress in different cultures. We know that, right, that there is nothing objective about very few things that are objective about our bodies and how we present them to each other. So that category seems to be, it has an audience, right? And it's probably not the baby. And again, a mother desperate to feed her child, again, probably doesn't really care.
Well, it even goes back to Adam Harishon, where after they eat from the eights, they cover up their naked parts because they felt shame on having those exposed. So, I mean, it even goes into that.
That's another topic. I'm actually teaching that tomorrow to my 12th graders. Yeah. Come to SAR. You can come on Zoom.
He went there.
I went to Akiva before it was SAR, but I taught at SAR for about 6 weeks a long time ago.
Oh, wow. That's great. I love that.
Okay, I don't want to keep Dr. Jacobowitz any longer, but if people do want to get in touch with her, have questions, I assume I can share your contact information if that's
100%.
Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, it was great seeing everyone, and this really was very thought-provoking, very enjoyable.
Thank you.
So thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.